All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. In a shock to no one except Pac 12 Commissioner George Klakoff, maybe, the Big Ten has begun exploratory discussions on conference expansion. And as this news comes a day after Klakoff announced that Apple TV will more than likely be the main backer for a new Pac 12 TV deal, one would have to think that the Big Ten would have their eyes on more West Coast schools. Oregon, Washington, Cal, and Stanford have been rumored to be in play for the Big Ten, and count me under the category of not being surprised by it. I talked about this last year at this point when USC and UCLA announced their intentions to leave the Big Ten. I believe the Pac 12 for the Big Ten. And in that case, it opened up the floodgates. I said it was only going to be a matter of time before Oregon and Washington were wooed to go to the Big Ten. And with that said, Cal Stanford, from the historical factor when you're talking about Cal Berkeley as well as Stanford, and of course we know about the battle legally. Once UCLA made their announcement to go to the Big Ten because they're basically attached at the hip with Cal Berkeley. They're going to be sending money to Cal Berkeley, but now there's a possibility that Cal Berkeley could be joining them in the Big Ten, and of course they would get a piece of that pie. And then of course Stanford as well, two Northern California schools, close to that Northern California, San Francisco, Silicon Valley type media market that would definitely be also appealing for the Big Ten as well. The Pac 12 subsequently lost the Los Angeles media market, and I talked about this last year when USC and UCLA left. And of course, that was and it will continue to be tougher for them to get any new TV deal going forward, regardless if this conference is able to survive. Now, ESPN and Fox are not on board with the Pac 12, and you have to wonder if the lower tier offers that the Pac 12 has been getting or has gotten rather from ESPN and Fox during these negotiations, it comes in part of a grander scheme, if you will, as far as flushing out the conference altogether in order to allow the Big Ten with their deep pockets and the Big 12 to also come in and swoop over the remains of the conference of champions. It's just something to throw out there. You never know because, like anything else, there's plenty of backdoor politics that are going on. Now, the Pac 12 is not blameless in all of this, is because they've been dragging their feet on conference expansion for years. Again, when the Big 12 was teetering on the brink a while back, the Pac 12 had the opportunity to get Texas and Oklahoma, and they didn't do it. And this league would be in a much better spot right now if that was the case. Like I've said before, it's only going to be a matter of time before we are looking at a 20-team college football conference, as you cannot also overlook the fact that some schools in the ACC, most notably Florida State, are not happy with their payouts compared to that of the Big Ten and SEC. Now, each round of conference realignment has seen the death of at least one conference. You go back to 1995, and it was a Southwest Conference that was really hampered after the NCAA handed down that death penalty to SMU. That was basically the first of the fatal blows to the Southwest Conference, as they lost out on so much TV money with SMU not having their program for a couple of years. And the end result, we saw Arkansas leave to join the SEC. And then, of course, in the mid 90s, it was Texas, Baylor, Texas A&M, and Texas Tech joining the Big Eight to form the Big 12. About 11 years ago, about 10 years ago, rather, we saw the Big East and Western Athletic Conferences ceasing their football operations. And this time around, it could be the Pac 12, while the ACC, because this is not just a Florida State thing, okay? The ACC could lose members to the Big 10, Big 12, and SEC in the coming years. It might not be a just an all-out gut job right away. But I guarantee you, little by little, you're going to see ACC members looking to go to other conferences. It's also hurt the Pac-12 that the Big 12 got a sweet television deal without the possession of those football powerhouses. Remember, they did this knowing that Texas and Oklahoma are going to the SEC next year, and you look at it. Larry Scott, Klyakov, and the Pac-12 as a whole, have dropped the ball. You think about Larry Scott with the Pac-12 network, that was a disaster from the word go. You look at the deal with Apple TV, it's an incentive-based deal, and that's not what school presidents want to hear. They want to hear about the guaranteed money. And it could be good, yes, but at the end of the day, if you are trying to set up your athletic budget for the year and your main source of revenue is college football, you can't go off of, well, maybe if we get enough subscribers, we can get 30 or $35 million a year, as opposed to maybe we might only get 15 or $20 million a year. School presidents and administrators do not want to hear that. And I think this could be the final blow to the Pac 12. It's one of those for me, the Pac 12 has been hurt. And I will say this: there is a West Coast bias as far as football. People are not going to stay up on the East Coast late at night to watch games. And also something that's going to be overlooked by some people, and I'm going to say it right now. When USC went on probation about 14 or 15 years ago by the NCAA, that hurt the Pac 12 because if you go back to the mid 2000s and what USC was, they were must see TV. Okay. You had Reggie Bush, you had Pete Carroll, you had Matt Leinart, and of course, Pete Carroll at that time was sending a who's who of first rounders to the NFL on a yearly basis. That probation period really hurt the Pac-12 conference. You go back to the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and even 1990s, the face of the Pac-12 football wise was always USC and UCLA. When those programs are consistently in the top 10, it it gives the conference, and it has given the conference, a different feel. Also, the fact that the Pac-12, has been left out of the college football playoff picture. You figure since the college football playoff was created, and it was nearly a decade now. Okay, we've gotten Oregon there one time. We've got Washington there one time. You've never gotten USC there. We've never gotten UCLA or any of your other prominent schools in that conference there. Flip it around on the other side of the country. You look at the SEC as an example. Alabama is basically in the mix every year. The same thing can be said for Georgia. The same thing can be said for LSU. Of course, for the Big 12 for years, it was dominated by Oklahoma. And then, of course, TCU made it last year. And then, of course, the Big 10. You've had Michigan State make it. Of course, Ohio State is always in the mix. And now we're seeing Michigan getting there as well. And it's only going to be a matter of time before Penn State breaks through. ACC, it's been all about Clemson. But nonetheless, the Pac 12 has been pulling up the rear in this discussion. And with that said, they're losing out on that exposure. They're also losing out on that money. So, I mean, for Oregon and Washington, if they were to exit stage right for the Big Ten, they won't get a full share of the television revenue from the conference immediately because the deal has already been negotiated. However, they would get partial guaranteed money, which of course is going to be better than full unguaranteed money from an incentive and subscription based deal that looks like it's going to be the backbone, if you will, of the Pac 12 should it survive. Of course, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State, they've been previously courted by the Big 12. Those invitations are still going to be there. The Big 12 has already gotten Colorado to jump ship. And if this thing falls through, it's only going to be a matter of time before they go there. So, with that said, what happens to Washington State as well as Oregon State, Mountain West, possibly Big 12, Big 10, or maybe football independence altogether? Would the Big 10 want Washington State and Oregon State? I'm not sure. Would the Big 12 want Washington State and Oregon State? Possibly. Would the Mountain West want to do it? Possibly as well. And I'll tell you like this, the Mountain West really could come out of this smelling like a rose because maybe, just maybe, they could be looked at a little bit differently, especially if Washington State and Oregon State join. I don't know. But a lot has to be dissected. And I think what is going to happen with this Pac-12 deal if other schools, decide to make the same decision that Colorado just made, I think it is going to lead to seismic disruption on the college football scene. And to me, like I said, West Coast football has not been respected for some time. And I will also say that the NCAA, and I've said this before and I'm going to say it again, the NCAA has really failed its members because when you look at USC and UCLA leaving the Pac-12 for the Big Ten, when you look at Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 for the SEC, when you look at Nebraska leaving the Big 12 for the Big Ten, when you look at Colorado leaving the Big 12 to go to the Pac-12 to come back, a lot of that comes down to money. And the problem is this: if you're USC, you sat back and you saw all of the money that a Vanderbilt or a Mississippi State is getting from a television deal for football when they're not on your level historically and they're making twice and maybe three times the amount of money that you were getting from your conference deal. If you're Oklahoma, you're sitting back and looking at the money that Rutgers is getting from a Big Ten deal. And of course, Rutgers, football wise, cannot hold a flame historically to Oklahoma. These are the problems. There's no revenue sharing in college sports. And also, and I know that, of course, college football and college basketball, are prime examples of, preseason, the bigger schools will, give money to the little schools to come out there and play them. I get that part. But the problem is when you look at the professional ranks, and of course, these are professional type contracts and television deals that these conferences are getting right now. It's a scenario where at the pro level, there's revenue sharing. You're not having revenue sharing at the collegiate level. That right there is a big problem. There's no regulation. I think there's the powers that be want more regulation for NILs than they do as far as conferences. And of course, let's pull it back for a minute. I know that the smaller athletic programs don't exist without football at the collegiate level, but now we're asking kids to go back and forth across the country just to have a conference game or a conference series or a conference meet. And the thing is this: if you're in one of those lower tier sports, you're not going to get the amenities that the football program is going to get. You're not going to be getting on a plane like USC might be getting to go to Iowa City to take on the Hawkeyes. It might be a bus, it might be a train, it might be a string of planes. So it's one of those where if you're the NCAA, you still want to pump the student athlete aspect, but you're taking so much away from these young people. And I think, and obviously, it's not going to happen now unless there is a huge reset somewhere down the road. And I don't see that happening for at least another 10 or 15 years at the very least. But you got to go back to having conferences focus solely on the region, and again it comes down to everybody not being on the same page, and I hold the NCAA completely accountable for that. I mean, you think about it, it wasn't that long ago where West Coast football was all about the West Coast. The SEC was all about the Southeast. The Southwest Conference was primarily just about the state of Texas. When you thought about the Big 12, the Big Eight, you thought about a Midwest thing. When you thought about the Big Ten, you thought about a Midwest thing. Now we're talking about cross country conferences, and it's only going to get worse because if Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah go to the Big 12, you've basically got so many regions of the country covered. And then, of course, the Big 12 still could possibly look at San Diego State, not to mention, you got UCF on the East Coast in that conference. You got Cincinnati, you got Houston, you got BYU. They're all over the place. You look at the American Conference, who has done so many things to try to survive and so forth. This is the state of the game. And the thing is, I'm not a fan of it. Obviously, I don't have a vote at the table, as most of us, all of us really don't. It comes down to the powers that be, and it comes down to the chase for money. And I think if everybody was on equal footing, like they were at the pro level, this would change things. Obviously, if you're a conference commissioner, your first and priority, and it's going to be your only priority, is to keep your members happy. If you're in the Big Ten, you're not going to worry about the Pac-12 or the ACC or whatever they're doing, because at the end of the day, if those conferences can't get a TV deal that all of the members like, you can just sit back and just like a vulture come in and swoop and get whatever school you want. And that's just what's going to happen. Within the next 10 years, don't be surprised if Florida State and Clemson and Miami are in the SEC. Don't be surprised about more schools joining the Big Ten. And if that's the case, where's the ACC headed? This is the nature of the beast. It's unfortunate. It's a business, as much as the NCAA wants to deny it. But, this is the nature of things. The Pac 12, if the Pac 12 survives this, count me among the many that will be highly surprised. You look at it, the way things are going, it's a recipe for disaster. We're going to get a 20 team conference soon. I think by the end of the decade, if not sooner. I guarantee it. But nonetheless, this is the direction that college football is heading. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So, once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.